BBC News with Sue Montgomery. Activists in Myanmar say the security forces have killed at least 39 people in one of the deadliest days since huge demonstrations began against the military coup last month. 22 protesters died in an industrial suburb of the biggest city, Yangon, after Chinese-funded factories were reportedly attacked by demonstrators who believe Beijing supports the military government. Will Leonardo reports.
The demonstrators in the neighbourhood of Klang Daya had barricaded themselves in with sandbags, car tyres and barbed wire when the security forces opened fire. Using makeshift shields, some were seen inching forward to retrieve the injured. Medical workers said the number of dead was likely to rise, with dozens suffering gunshot wounds. The violence came after Chinese-financed factories in the area were set alight. At the UN, China has refused to condemn the coup in Myanmar, and protesters believe Beijing is supporting the Burmese army.
The head of the police force in London says she won't resign over the way her officers broke up a vigil in memory of a woman allegedly murdered by a policeman. Cressida Dick defended the police response, saying the gathering of several hundred people was unlawful given the pandemic.
They have a really difficult job. They have to make fine judgments. They often don't have infinite information or all the time in the world. They have to make these really difficult calls. And I don't think anybody should be sitting back in an armchair and saying, well, that was done badly or I would have done it differently, without actually understanding what was going through their minds.
Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he is deeply concerned about the way the police broke up the vigil. Supporters of the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro have been protesting against lockdown measures imposed by local authorities to control the coronavirus. Here's our Americas editor, Leonardo Rocha.
In Rio de Janeiro, thousands of people turned up at the seafront to demand that restrictions be eased so the economy can recover. Large crowds also took to the streets of São Paulo. The demonstrations come as Brazil reports a record high number of COVID-19 cases and deaths. Hospitals are overcrowded in most states, and many patients have died waiting for places in intensive care units. Despite appeals for people to follow the rules, police have been busy dispersing illegal gatherings. A top Brazilian football player, Gabriel Barbosa, was among 200 people detained earlier at the São Paulo casino for violating an overnight curfew.
Exit polls in Germany suggest that Chancellor Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats have fared poorly in two regional elections seen as a pointer to September's general election. The party is on course for around a quarter of the vote in the former conservative strongholds of Baden-Württemberg and Rhineland-Palatinate. BBC News. Dutch police have said a warning shot was fired as officers cleared anti-government demonstrators from a park in The Hague, a day before voting begins in a general election. The incident is being investigated. Protesters, complaining mainly about coronavirus restrictions, used yellow umbrellas to shield themselves from a police water cannon. Police said the agreed limit of 200 protesters had been exceeded. The Irish government has suspended the use of the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine because of concern over reports of blood clots in Norwegian recipients. The Health Secretary said the move was a precautionary step. Here's our Europe regional editor, Mike Sanders.
Irish officials admit there's no proof of a link between blood clots and the AstraZeneca vaccine, but the suspension can only fuel resistance to that brand. Stocks in Germany are sitting unused. That's partly due to erroneous claims, notably by the French President Emmanuel Macron, that it was ineffective in people over 65. France, Belgium and Germany have all rescinded their initial refusal to give it to older people. AstraZeneca says that among the 17 million people who've had its jab in Europe, only 37 cases of blood clots have been reported, much lower than would be expected to occur naturally in a general population that size.
At least 15 Yemeni soldiers are reported to have been killed during an attack on the school in which they were stationed. 3 children were also reported to have died when at least one missile, fired by Houthi rebels, struck the building in the Taiz region. Government forces took control of the area from rebel fighters last week. The Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, says New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo, who's facing sexual misconduct allegations, should look inside his heart to see if he can govern effectively. Mr. Cuomo says he's done nothing wrong. BBC News.